Awesome. Okay. So before we jump right into today's content, we wanted to ask all of you another question. You can either answer with like a thumbs up or a note in the chat. But we noticed, especially for those of you who maybe work with the like kind of perinatal through like menopause clientele, if you guys are noticing an increase in either self-identifying clients or clients who are being formally identified with either autism, ADHD, or ADHD. If you guys are noticing a what feels, at least for us, like a pretty, yeah, substantial increase. Yeah.
Yep. Yes, lots of yeses in the chat.
Yes, lots of yeses. Okay, yes. So us too. And this work for us is deeply passionate and personal for both Christine and I, because we are two of those people who were late identified folk through the kind of perinatal through perimenopause period. Christine, you want to like introduce yourself and your story first?
Absolutely. So I'm Christine Cunningham, and I am in Oshawa, just outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I am late diagnosed first ADHD and then autism in the last year. And so, uh, yeah, that's been a big journey. And of course, like Kelly said, personal and, goes into a lot of like our work and how I work. So there's that too. But anyways, I'll try to rein it in. But you will see me fidgeting and you will see me move around a lot. I try to minimize the distraction, but that is part of my hyperactive ADHD. And I am a social service worker, registered social service worker in Ontario. I now work in private practice and had a background in addictions, but shifted to the perinatal population, and then found IFS through my work. And my supervisor suggested, and when I got to know IFS, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense for me, and like all the parts, and I have so many parts, and I really related to it personally and professionally. And so once I started integrating it into my work, it was great. It just really felt like a good fit for me, and Kelly and I both find like it just fits really well for the perinatal population as well as neurodivergent folks.
Um, so I'm Kelly, as I kind of alluded to. So I am also a late identified neurodiverse autistic. For me, my story was I was diagnosed with postpartum anxiety. My son was 8 or is 8 now. I was diagnosed with postpartum anxiety. It fit, but it didn't always feel like it fit the whole story. And then it was like, oh, well, you were not just postpartum anxiety, you've had anxiety your whole life, which was like, yes, but still didn't quite fit. And then I think like many of us, I started to watch my son and I started to deep dive into autism. And I was like, a lot of these pieces fit. So I was formally identified at the age of 39 as autistic. And it was kind of for me, it felt like all of the pieces kind of clicked into place, where my story now made so much more sense than maybe just saying it was postpartum anxiety or anxiety. Um, so I too found IFS quite a few years ago now. I found it through my own postpartum journey. And I always kind of tell the story of like the minute my managers heard my therapist say the word manager, they just kind of like all stood up and were like, yes, we are. And that's really how I found it. Much like Christine started, I would say probably for Christine and I would both probably bring a little like special interest energy into using IFS, and especially with like this population. Um, and so started to really find that it paired beautifully with the perinatal population in general. And then Christine and I, am going to speak on your behalf a little bit, started to notice that, we'd maybe as we teach IFS now or use IFS, we don't always follow exactly like maybe what some of the other guidelines are because some of those pieces just didn't fit. And I think a big piece of it, which is what we're going to talk about today, is this idea of like we can't just forget the nervous system in IFS work, especially when working with neurodiverse clients, that we really need to take into account sort of what is neurology and what are parts.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we'll just say these lunch and learn sessions are offered as free, informal educational sessions. We don't provide certificates of completion or confirmations of attendance for the lunch and learns. Um, just so you know. Do you want me to start with the case example?
I do.
Okay, all right. So here's a case example for everyone, and we'll talk about it a little more.
Yeah, notes.
A new mom comes to see you. She insists, and this is gendered, I'm using gendered language here. She insists on feeding, bathing, and putting her baby down at the exact same time every day and becomes visibly distressed, snapping at her partner, feeling shaky, overwhelmed when something throws off her schedule. Let's say it's a doctor's appointment or a repair person coming to the house. And she's come to see you because everyone around her tells her she needs to relax, and she's starting to wonder why everyone around her seems to be having an easier time of being a mom or a parent.
All right, so we're going to revisit this case example in a second. But for us, IFS feels like a beautiful way to support this client. So we're just going to take a minute to give you an overview of the IFS model in case it's completely new to you.
Yeah. And then we'll
So,
come back to the case example.
so if we're to look at the IFS model itself, the kind of core beliefs are that our minds are multiple. We're made up of multiple parts. These parts have feelings, they might have diagnoses, some of them carry the trauma. We also have parts of daily living, but all of our parts are there in order to protect us. And we really firmly believe that there are no bad parts. So when we look at the IFS model, we have first part I'm going to talk about is an exile. So, an exiled part of us is really the part of us that holds trauma, holds beliefs maybe about ourselves, or holds really hard feelings, such as like fear. These parts, I always think of them as like the part of us that took the hit for the rest of the system. They take on these beliefs, they take on these like traumas, and they get exiled away into our system, kind of tucked away and out of sight, hopefully out of mind. And we have these protector parts that jump in that really try to do this for us. So our manager parts are proactive parts that work often tirelessly to keep these hard feelings at bay. Then we have these firefighting parts of us they're reactive parts. So unlike the managers who try to keep that trauma or those hard feelings from coming to the surface, firefighters step in when those feelings have been activated. And they will step in. Often they feel quite extreme, but they will do almost anything to shut that feeling back away or to get rid of that part. Then we also have one of the core principles or the core beliefs of IFS is that among all of those parts of us is we also have the self or self energy. Again, you can use whatever term you like, core self energy, whatever works for you. And this is really the core us that cannot be damaged. Although it often is hidden by all of these other protective parts, the self is always there. And we know when we are in self by the kind of way that we often feel. So oftentimes when somebody accesses their self energy, they often describe a feeling of compassion, curiosity. Calm is a word that is often used. However, there's some like talk in the IFS community about what does calm actually mean, but in the traditional model, calm is one of the words that shows up. So it's really this place where like our core values live, where we feel compassionate and curious. In the model, we try to come into self or use self energy to build a relationship with all of these other parts of us, our managers, our firefighters, and then ideally our exiles, where we learn why our parts do what they do and hopefully work towards befriending and getting to know those exiles and unburdening from those beliefs or fears that they have taken on. And then we also just like to remind everybody that there's also parts of daily living, and those are parts of us that are not burdened. They don't have extreme roles. I usually use like the banking part as an example, where like the banking part will just pop in, we'll do its banking, and then we'll back off and soften away in order for us to keep going. Anything to add, Christine?
No, you got it.
Right.
And so if we look at, sorry, I'm going to go back to, I'll just keep the case example up here. So if we were to look at this client from an IFS perspective, again, don't worry if like this is your first time hearing anything about IFS, don't worry. But if anyone has any thoughts, how might you interpret this case example from an IFS parts perspective? And if you want, feel free to pop it in the chat and we'll see what comes up.
You can also just yell it out if you want.
Yeah, yell it out if you want.
Manager parts trying to keep routine and consistency. I think about hardware and software and wonder how much of this is due to her neurotype versus her parts. Yes, Sharon, have you listened to this already? Manager part with a schedule. Yes, Sarah says she's got some activated parts, irritability. Anyone else?
All good. So, I mean, if is firefighter snapping at her partner? Could be, could be. Could be a manager, definitely could be. Critical part, comparing self to others. Yeah, absolutely. That inner critic, so strong, which we see a lot of in the perinatal period for sure.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, a therapist part might, sorry, a therapist, yeah, my therapist part might interpret this as like an anxious manager part trying to control an unpredictable new parenthood reality, which again, we do see a lot of that in the perinatal period, maybe rooted in like an early experience of, perhaps chaos or lack of safety. So that trying to gain control to, feel safe, feel in control.
For us, we look at a client now, and I saw somebody else in the chat earlier said maybe they're not necessarily seeing like identified autistic or ADHD clients, but you're starting to see this. And this is what I think we are kind of like our core is being like, we need to keep this in the back of our mind with these clients is like, what if this rigid routine isn't guarding against an emotional wound at all? What if this is actually her neurology and how she manages sensory overload and executive functioning as an autistic person, for example? And this schedule is genuinely regulating her nervous system rather than protecting her from a feeling underneath. If we were to see this like rigidity as a part, we risk further inducing shame for something that cannot be changed. But if we were able to differentiate her neurology from her protective parts, we can begin to support both her neurology and begin to support and heal her protective parts and burdens. And I just want to like give a little like I was like, this case example may have been written about me in my postpartum period, but that did happen, right? Where rigidity was seen as something to be worked with and something that I should be changing, which ended up causing so much more distress for me than if it had been seen as like an actual part of my neurology.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting for me looking back, also is seeing the rigidity, but I saw it as like a strength because, and it caused me a lot of difficulty, but I saw it as a strength because not that I knew I had ADHD, but always feeling like I'm scattered, I'm all over the place, I can't stick to a routine. And so that rigidity from the autistic side came in and like felt soothing and felt helpful. And so it's interesting to look back and see that dynamic in the ADHD parts of it.
Yeah.
Neurology. Yeah.
So Sarah brings up a point. She says, as a currently 4-month postpartum ADHD woman, my irritability comes out when one of my protectors wants me to feel safe and protected and not overwhelmed with mental load. Absolutely. Like makes so much sense. And I think for us too is like the really like easy but hard piece to this is like sometimes there is this question of like, is this neurology? Is this a part? And I'm like, the easy but hard thing is you just ask, right? Like once you know the model and you start to work with it. But that's digressing a little bit. We'll get back in here. Sorry, one more comment. As a late in life diagnosed ADHD person myself, in relationship with a late in life diagnosed autistic person, yes, it has been not a common experience at all. Um, it has been life changing to learn about how our brains work and work so differently. I mean, life changing, right? It just like reframes your whole sort of being.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Okay.
so why does this matter? Why are we, having this webinar? Why are we talking about this? And why I've even developed a training specifically for this is because for generations, autism and ADHD, again, I'm going to be very gendered here, but in females and female identified folks at birth went unrecognized,
Unrecognized.
unrecognized, masked by socialization, patriarchy, minimized by gender bias, misread by diagnostic tools built around a different profile, and mainly a boys or men profile. And those hormonal shifts across the reproductive lifespan now appear to be a significant catalyst for both identification and symptom change, making the perinatal and perimenopausal window really critical and often destabilizing. Check and check moments of self-discovery. And so that's why, if again, when we're talking about like, are you seeing folks like this kind of happening, either you're noticing symptoms or traits in folks and then also they're getting diagnosed at this stage, it's because we're coming to this stage and all of a sudden the mental load, the overwhelm, the sensory overload, all of it is contributing to like, we can't cope anymore. And so understanding, like if clinicians can understand this intersection, we're uniquely positioned to offer something transformative. Like those comments, right? Of like, it's life changing.
Yeah, absolutely. It is both destabilizing often and life changing in many ways. So as we mentioned, we're here to talk about IFS, and that IFS is a beautiful way to support either perinatal clients, such as the one we've been talking about, and it's a beautiful way to support autistic and ADHD clients because it allows us to, one, unburden the mask and not the self underneath. So masking parts are exhausting protector parts, right? Ones that learn to suppress stimming, force eye contact, script conversations, override sensory pain to stay safe or accepted. IFS is well suited to working with that part or those parts directly, understanding what it's afraid will happen if it stops, thanking it for protecting the person, and negotiating more rest from constant performance without trying to fix the traits it's been masking.
Yeah. Then we can also get to know the parts and work with the nervous system, as Kelly mentioned before. And so the nervous system of an autistic, ADHD, or ADHD person is wired differently than someone who's neurotypical. And we want to get to know the parts and traits, as well as discuss nervous system soothing and regulation. I would say that happens in every session with every client, but particularly as something that I tell folks taking with them between sessions is that nervous system soothing. How are we implementing it? How are we supporting them? What works for them? What are some new ideas? But that becomes, I think, priority, especially then in the perinatal period and during perimenopause. And sometimes I just wanted to know too, like how those can come close together. Like I have a lot of clients who I work with, folks who, are on fertility journeys or have had their kids through IVF or IUI or different fertility treatments. And so oftentimes they are having kids like in their later 30s, for example, or early 40s. And then maybe like a year later, a couple years later, they're entering in perimenopause. So often these like then parenting, toddlers, little ones, the postpartum period even coinciding with perimenopause is
Yes.
also a big piece.
Yeah, and a little caveat too is like we also know from the research that like the research has only looked at ADHD clients so far. I would hazard a guess that autistic clients are very similar, that we know that like perimenopause symptoms can start to show up like 10 years earlier than like non-ADHD people. So to know like oftentimes like that whole period is coming like in very quick succession for a lot of folks.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. So IFS can also help us to address the shame layers from a lifetime of being othered. Many ADHD adults carry exile, so holding memories of being called too much, weird, lazy, or dramatic, often from years before actual identification occurs. IFS's compassionate, non pathologizing stance towards these exiles can be reparative here in a way that purely like behavioral or skill based therapies often just aren't built to reach.
Yeah. Again, that word behavioral. I do have a part that reacts to it. Again, as I mentioned, I'm a parent to 3 neurodivergent kids. And, that word behavior, I can't tell you how many phone calls I've gotten because of my kids' behavior. And so that's really tough. And even now I can sense that part is here and present for me. And I'm just gonna give it a little love. But that piece of how pathologizing that is, and like, we'll just change your behavior, just do it different, concentrate better, be better. Anyways, I'm digressing here, but that's really hard. Again, if it's not a part, if it's the neurology and that's impaired or difficult for us to do, then that's a lifetime of being told that we're too much, we're not okay, something's wrong with us. Actually, Sharon just posted in the chat, never underestimate the power of finding other ND people to be friends with. Absolutely.
That's why Christine and I get along
Yeah,
so well.
exactly. I was like, that's why Kelly and I are together.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, oh, sorry.
Yeah. No. Go.
Is it me or you?
It's you.
So then the next step, like we mentioned, someone mentioned in the chat, we mentioned before, but working with that inner critic, again, kind of as an extension to what we just talked about, right? Addressing those layers of shame and working with that inner critic built from that external criticism, also systems of oppression we're going to talk about, but, that, I'm just going to come back to what I need to say, but ADHD and autistic people frequently, we internalize, those harsh managers formed directly from teachers, parents, bosses who criticize traits like I said, inattention, interrupting, miss social cues. So IFS is good at separating that critical voice is a part trying to prevent further humiliation. And it's separating that from this critical voice is telling the truth about my worth, right? That's shame, which can meaningfully loosen that chronic shame.
And then often kind of the times tied in with that is we can use IFS to unburden cultural burdens, not just personal ones. And that sounds to me like a lot of what Christine was just talking about as well. But for autistic and ADHD clients, many burdens carried by parts didn't originate in a single family of origin wound, which is often what we look at in IFS. They were absorbed from an ableist culture that pathologized their natural traits across years of school, work, and social feedback. And just like as a side note, like we know there's like if there's not a single research study that shows this, but it's been talked about quite often that kiddos with ADHD, and like I would extrapolate, I think this to a lot of autistic folk as well, on estimate receive like 20,000 more criticisms before the age of 10 than their non-ADHD counterparts. So again, for me, that's that idea of like, of course, we have these inner critics, right? That were developed to try to protect us against that. But IFS can be adapted to name these explicitly as cultural burdens. Like for that example of like, I'm too much, I need to try harder to be normal, quote unquote, rather than searching for one personal origin scene that just may not exist. This keeps the unburdening accurate and validating. The work becomes releasing what an ableist culture taught the person to believe about themselves, not erasing the neurology underneath it. And I think for me in my sort of journey post identification, like it was pretty shocking to a lot of parts, and still is, about how much internalized ableism I have. But IFS is like such a beautiful way to start to recognize that and be able to begin to unburden it while still recognizing the realities of living within the constructs that do oppress us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, of course, looking at those intersections of how race, homophobia, transphobia, you know, so many things contribute also to the development of exiles and these cultural burdens that we carry, that also, as we know, like, will also increase the likelihood of these exiles happening, of trauma happening, when there's more intersectionality there for kids and adults who are living in many of these different, like, are part of many of these different groups, and then living within these patriarchal, racist, white supremacist, ableist cultures. And so that's also where we want to, try to use IFS to differentiate the neurological traits from the parts that have developed to protect us. And so we can, how do we use IFS in our practice, really is the question here, in a neuro-affirming way. And this is, all of these things we've talked about is how, but in IFS, one of the first things we often do is create a parts map. And when working with autistic ADHD clients, IFS helps most when the therapist can tell the difference between a protector part, which has a fear, a job, something it's guarding against, and maybe thought of like software, and a neurological trait, which is stable. There's no burden. It doesn't shift with safety. Maybe thought of like the hardware. With clients, I say neurology, I use that. And so used with discernment, IFS can become a tool for shedding the learned layers of self-protection, like we talked about, while leaving I'm doing this, of like my neurology, while leaving the autistic ADHD wiring underneath intact and unpathologized. It's not a symptom or a behavior to fix or change. That is a trait. That's how you're wired. We're not here to change that, rather than treating it as, again, one more thing to unburden. Oh, we're going to try to make you less fidgety, or, less rigid, or anyways, the list goes on. So again, if we think back to our new mom that we spoke about at the beginning of the session, it's important to differentiate what is her neurology and what are her parts that are protecting her. So working with this mom, we would first identify her neurological traits. And
Can I just put a caveat here too?
yes,
Sorry to like completely derail you.
go for it.
Is I just also want to name, we are doing this as a hypothetical with this hypothetical client. This is not to say like this is going to be like what all autistic like neurological traits or all clients with ADHD traits are going to look like. You have to adapt it to like your individual client. So I just want to put that caveat. We're not saying this is like a one size fits all. This is what we are hypothesizing this particular client has.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
And that is a great also key point when talking about, the hard wiring and the neurology, is that even if you put me beside someone with ADHD, they're still going to show up. Our traits are still going to look really different in our everyday lives because of so many factors: environment, how we were raised, et cetera, et cetera. So if we were to look at that, that parent in the thing.
Case example.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to look at, if we look at neurological traits, we want to think about the sensory processing and sensory overload from parenting. Even as I say that, I can feel my body kind of like, yep, it's so hard. Crying, screaming, babies being sick, being touched out, body feeding, contact napping, toys, music, baby music, kid music. I could not. Anyways, so much of that I couldn't cope with. Hindsight's 2020. Kid vocal stimming in the car. Yes, that's another thing, is like generally, if the parent, the client is neurodivergent, or kids are neurodivergent, one of or both our parents are going to be as well, if they're biologically related. Executive functioning. So the struggle with, the overwhelm of parenting, multitasking, which is not real, overall cognitive demands, like the intense high demands of parenting, task switching, emotion regulation, all of that is part of executive functioning, which is, I feel like parenting is just all executive functioning. I saw a thing on Instagram the other day and it like made me cry, was like a parent or a mom, again, I'm being very gendered here, is generally interrupted like 200 times a day or something. And I was like, yes, no wonder I can't cope. Makes sense. And then
Right. And just the like neuro, like, and again, well, I'm going to take your last point of the whole idea of like monotropism too, of having this like deep, narrow attention style, plus having like task switching is very hard for a lot of like neurodiverse folk. And then add in the like 200 interruptions a day. Like, of course.
so hard.
Yeah. So hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in that, we've got this like the hardware that we were talking about, or this parent's neurological traits that she is presenting in front of us. So first step for us is like really differentiating that as best we can so that we don't pathologize it, right? And not that we're pathologizing a part, but a part we really work towards trying to like unburden the role that it has, or at least understand or get it to soften, where we don't want to do that with a neurological trait because we can't, right? So first is like really looking at that hardware. And then,
It's backwards.
yeah, I was like, that doesn't look right.
Sorry, folks. Just so you know, it should be backwards. This should be reversed.
So looking at first is looking at the hardware. So what is stable, what doesn't have a burden, and does not shift when safety is present. Then we want to do the parts map. So in this case study that we're looking at that activating event is a change in routine, right? A protector part that are visible in this case, like a hold it all together part, an inner critic, and like a snappy or irritability and control part. What I hear in that like exile, like as an exile in that case, is this like, I'm not good enough, right? I'm not a good enough mom. Why is everybody able to do this so much better than I can? And I hear in that the cultural burdens that show up, right? Ableism, individualism, probably a whole heck of a lot more. So in this example, the part really sits on top of and separate from her neurology. The rigid routine itself is not a part, it's a genuine, like sensory executive need. Only the shame and self attack when it breaks our IFS workable, unburdening the exile of not a good enough mom, not the need for routine. If we are unable to differentiate that neurology from the parts, we risk further pathologizing and shaming the neurology, deepening the already held exiles and belief.
Yes. And so, again, because we might say like, if if this is a part and like, we're maybe asking questions like, how could this part support you in a different way? Maybe not using rigidity, right? I'm just giving like a quick example. Again, that might be like so confusing. And you might notice between sessions, there's an increase in potential anxiety or, uh, irritability, for example. And if you're noticing over time, like things are not changing or not shifting or not moving, like this is not feeling helpful, that's a good, way to kind of turn back and look like maybe this is neurology, right? And so standard IFS conceptualization assumes a fairly typical nervous system and a fairly typical relationship to masking, sensation, and rejection. But for neurodiverse clients and for neurodiverse providers, parts often develop and protect in ways that don't fit the usual map. And so one concrete way to work more effective or accurately, with neurodiverse clients in the perinatal period is understanding how masking, rejection sensitive dysphoria, hate the word, but anyways, that's what it's called. But I like to say rejection sensitivity interoceptive differences, how we feel the things in our body, and nervous system variability actually shape how parts form. So that's also why it's super important to understand that for the client in front of you and yourself. If you're neurodivergent, if someone's neurodivergent, is like, how does my hardware, how is it impacted the development of my parts and software, over my lifespan?
All right, so to try to put this in like a succinct summary, which we're really good at, a parts map assumes an internal system, subpersonalities that formed in response to experience, often carrying emotional burdens, operating in protector exile dynamics. The implicit theory is parts are dynamic, they're relational, they can shift, they can unburden, or they can update over time. Your prompts, such as where are they located in the body? What sensations do you notice? What emotion do you notice? What thoughts do you have? Are designed to help someone access and build relationships with a part, with the goal kind of ultimately being to transform that part's job or that role or integrate it into the system.
Yeah. And so, in contrast, a traits or neurology map needs a different theory underneath it. Autistic and ADHD traits aren't parts carrying burdens to be healed or unburdened. They're a stable neurotype, just like my freckles. I don't know, I just felt like saying that. Like, it's like they're here, I can't change them. Same as my neurology. I don't know why I said that, and now I'm embarrassed. Anyway, if you map them using parts style prompts, you risk implying that the trait itself is a wounded part to fix, which runs against neuro-affirming practice and can feel invalidating and even parallel to masking pressure. Like, let's heal your stimming, right? So a traits map should orient towards understanding, function, and support rather than origin and healing. Like, where did this come from? How did it develop? How did it get this job? It's like, I don't know, I was born this way. Like, that's the hardware. So the core reframe parts map asks, what is this part protecting, carrying? How do I build a relationship with it? A traits map asks, what does this trait need in order to function well? One is about internal narrative and healing. The other is about environment, regulation, accommodation.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, these are things I wish if I look back to that me of like 8 years ago, if I had been able to recognize that, like the neurology from the parts, like again, I could like it makes me want to cry, right? Like that experience could have looked so different than what it did. So
Yeah.
I think, like we said before, like earlier, like as clinicians being aware of this, we do have such an opportunity to really like tap into something transformative for clients.
Absolutely.
So, as a thank you for being here today, Christine is going to drop a link in the chat with a handout that you can use for traits mapping and a handout you can use directly with clients to complete a parts map. So you guys can take it, roll with it now. So
And I'm
today
trying,
we
I don't know why I can't, I don't know why the chat is not opening
oh,
for me all
you
of a
can do
sudden.
it. Hold on, please hold.
Sorry, I don't know why it just disappeared on me. Love technology and when things change.
Oh, hold on. Oh my Lord, hold on. Meeting group chat.
Yes.
There, it came out. I tried to, it was originally going to post to the waiting room for some reason. Okay,
Yeah, that's why. Okay, thank you.
there we go. Um, Thank you. So sorry I was late. I thought the time was CST and thought I was early. Oh, Julia, we are going to send out the recording. So you will get everything that you will get. So the whole recording for it. But yeah, those time zones are tricky, man.
Yeah.
Okay. So we hope that today gave you a sharper lens for recognizing neurological traits from protective parts. Really like the first step in adapting IFS to be neuro-affirming, and is exactly why we have created our Parts Unmasked training program. It's a 2-day course. This course goes beyond trait mapping and gives particular attention to adapting the model for literal and concrete thinkers, alexithymia and interoception differences, understanding that our parts and even self are autistic and ADHD, and the importance of sensory and nervous system regulation in this work, which is something that like we really hold dear in this work. If you are new to IFS or want to deepen your understanding of the full model, our September training teaches you the complete framework from parts identification through unburdening, and that is our parts and transition course. This is a deeply engaging training with didactic learning, lots of discussion, and time each training day to practice using the model in small groups. Taking this course in September gives you like 2 months to put it into practice before diving into the nuance of working with autistic and ADHD clients. If you're already working with IFS, November is where we go deeper specifically with ADHD and autistic clients. So the details for the September and November courses are on the screen. As a thank you for being here, we want to extend an offer of 10% off the registration cost for the September training, as well as the November training. We do have payment plans available for both courses as well. And they are available directly on our website. As a further thank you, we also have a special rate for both courses that will be open for 1 week. And is only available through the following link, which Christine, I think, is going to drop in the chat. Yes. That's a combination rate for both courses. The regular rate for both trainings is like $2,399, and we are offering both courses for a total of $2,089 plus applicable taxes if you are a Canadian resident. This is a savings of like $310. If you would like to further discuss the trainings or have any questions, we would be more than happy to set up a 15-minute call. We will also hang on here until like 1 o'clock this afternoon, Eastern Standard Time, so another 13 minutes. If you have any questions about the content from today or any questions about either of the training courses, we are happy to hang on. Christine, anything you want to add?
No, that's it. Just as Kelly said, like we're here, so we have time for questions, especially about the content for today. We know that's a lot, especially if you're new to IFS even. So feel free, give us your questions, whether that's in the chat or shout it out. We're here. Yeah. And thank you all so much too for being here.
Will the vid be emailed? Or yes, you will receive an email from us following
right after
today as soon as the recording is available with the link.
Yeah, Sharon, go ahead.
I'm going to unmute just because I think it's a lot to type out. I'm wondering if you have thoughts. First of all, I just want to say thank you. I think this is great, and I think it's so needed. And I think neurodivergence is so much more common than we realize, and it's really important. But it feels like a trend that I see is folks that are kind of now realizing they're neurodivergent. And sometimes it can even be like a common one might be a male autistic person and then a female ADHD person or ADHD even, where they have overfunctioned for so long that they were like both burnt out. And of course, like patriarchy impacts all of this because of the way we're socialized, but they're all burned out, like everybody's burned out. And then it does feel really overwhelming because it's like I'm trying to help them look at their neurology. I'm trying to help them look at the practicalities. And realistically, I mean, I'm here in America where like it's a shit show right now. And I think we're also living in this collective distress, I guess. And I think when your nervous system is constantly being bombarded, it is hard to sort of do it differently. So I know that's kind of a lot, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts.
Absolutely. Kelly,
so one, I feel like, yes, like it is no joke. And we talk about that even in the like the full training where we talk about perinatal clients, of like recognizing the cultural burdens that are being held right now is like no joke. And the difference between like what we're experiencing in Canada and what's going on in the US are also very different things. And recognizing I think there's like a couple things. One is we always like we talk a lot about cultural burdens in both trainings and the importance of we are never dismissing the realities of the world in which we live. Like those are very true. It's about unburdening maybe the beliefs that we hold because of that. Two, for us, is that's why we really feel like we talk about burnout, like autistic and ADHD and burnout. We're going to talk about it specifically in the November training, like a pretty big section on it and how you can use IFS, because oftentimes it's like it comes down to the nervous system again, right? And that's why we think like sometimes there's this like thought in IFS about how like you don't really need to do nervous system regulation if you're working with the parts, where you're like with ADHD and autistic clients specifically, like that's just not, you can't, right? Like you have to do the nervous system regulation and like caring and going back to like the window of tolerance even, and like how do you open up that window of tolerance before you can do the parts work. But then oftentimes you need to do it's the parts work that keeps the client from participating in the nervous system work of like not believing that I deserve X, Y, and Z, right? And all of that. So for me, it's a lot of times unburdening and working with maybe the protectors that are just not allowing the client to believe that they're kind of worth that or that they should. It's like years worth. Did that answer the question?
Yeah,
So
it does. I mean, it even just gives me hope, right? Like that. I mean, sometimes I just want it to be different and it's not going to be, but what do we do with that knowledge? And it doesn't mean shying away from the pain of it. It means actually honoring it.
yeah,
Yes.
and I think sometimes that's it. It's the validation, right? Like, of course.
Yeah. And in that too, I'm hearing a lot of grief, right? And that I think comes, I mean, not I think, we talk about this specifically in our September training, but like the full IFS training of the grief of, first of all, the perinatal period, becoming parents, or whatever that looks like for us in parenting, but also in living in these systems of oppression. Yes, there can be anger, which moves us to action sometimes, and all those great things. And anger has a lot to say and important stuff to say. And also, so much of the time, there's grief under there too, of like, there's a lot of things we can't change, and that can feel hard and keep us stuck, and we can honor that grief together, right? Like in session and these kinds of spaces too, right? Of like, it's so awful out there right now, and it's scary and it's hard and it's sad and it's maddening and it's all the things, all the parts are welcome. Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Sarah, go ahead. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I'm curious if you're going to offer the November training again next year. I'm just like coming back from maternity leave in September. So while I signed up for the September training earlier when I had funds, my
Yes.
business account has dwindled low. So
Yeah, absolutely we are. Yes, we are going
awesome.
to, yeah, share those dates like later on in the year, in our newsletter. So, yeah.
Just as a, what did we say? May,
No, April,
April,
yeah,
April. Well, full training will be May. The
in February.
autistic ADHD training specifically will be April.
Yes. Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts coming up? Oh, you have something in the chat. Thank you so much for this, leaving with so many valuable. Oh, you're welcome, Victoria. I love that. Thank
Liz, you said I can probably find someone, but just curious how you guys do that if you suspect autism or ADHD. Like, how do we bring it up in conversation?
Oh, no, I think Liz
Did I
was
put something?
asking about referrals for assessments.
Yes, she's in care. Do you
Yeah.
mean like we specifically have people here? Here, Liz, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I always get nervous with technology. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can. You got it.
Okay. Um, this comes up a lot for me. So this is so helpful, first of all. And then secondly, I really want to have a great streamlined process to help confirm the ADHD and or the autism or the neurodivergence with clients. And I'm curious if you just kind of do that together, kind of looking at a list of qualities and kind of make this unofficial diagnosis, or if you send them to get tested specifically for autism or ADHD or neurodivergence.
Do you want to go ahead, Kelly?
Sure. So here I would say for me specifically, it's often, so there's like a couple things. One thing is like often therapists who are neurodiverse think we often attract a neurodiverse population, right? Whether the person knows it or not, there's like, I always call it like the neurodivergence, like spark that happens, right? Where it just feels comfortable and safe. So I think it's not a lot of like neurodiverse clients or therapists have a lot of neurodiverse clients. For me, I often like, again, I often just say like I use my own self energy to be like, does this feel right to bring it up? And so for me, it's a lot of times like, hey, and I think sometimes if it doesn't feel comfortable, it's looking at your own parts that are keeping you from doing it. But oftentimes it is also just knowing your client and being like, hey, like I did it yesterday where I was like, has like neurodiversity ever been on your radar? And often, like for me, I find it shocking how many times people are like, yes, right? Or I'll be like, I always say, like, give the caveat, like, I can't diagnose this, but these are the kind of things that I'm hearing that make me wonder or make me curious about it. And then from there, it's just really like, for up here in Canada, like we do have some like publicly funded programs, and then we also have private clinics. Up here, I would say it just depends on people's accessibility and affordability. But for me personally, especially with the population being that like for us perinatal through perimenopausal, it is very important whether I am sending a referral for someone or I will talk through it with a client of ensuring that like this clinician is well versed in what ADHD autism looks like in females and in like high masking females. And that for me is the like very big piece. But then also knowing that like self-identification for most folk is just as like is just as valid, right?
Yeah.
And so again, recognizing, especially in the States, maybe some of the challenges out there, but also here in Canada too, of like accessibility, and a lot of the private or the public clinics are very much like, based off of that very outdated knowledge. Self-identification can be super valid.
Absolutely. And Hillary makes a good point of also that official diagnosis, is important if people do need accommodations at work, or different resources, school, things like that. And so that's where it becomes important. And I will say, yes, we have some, healthcare covered assessment diagnosis tools in Ontario. Right now, the wait list is at least 1.5 years to 2 years. So it's not sunshine and rainbows either.
And I just also too want to recognize too, though, that even in saying that of like the importance of being able to get accommodations at work, that I think the culture in many states is very challenging right now, right? Of like people not wanting to disclose. I think it's complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great question, Liz. Thank you. Cassandra.
Hi, thanks so much for the training today.
Mhm.
2 quick questions, just in terms of the link that you put into the chat for the
Yeah.
training bundle. It
Yeah.
says it's available till August 19th, but when I click view course, it tells me to service not available. Please contact for more information.
Oh,
Shoot. Okay.
okay. Cassandra, we will look
Yes.
at that. Okay, so it'll go out in an email, but Cassandra, I will look for your name on our like on the sign up sheet, and we will ensure that the link is working on the back end and resend it.
Amazing.
Thank you for flagging. Like we'll email it to you. Thank you for flagging that.
Yeah. So sorry, everybody, about that.
That's okay. And then my other question was, it's okay if there's not, but is there a certificate of completion for this Lunch and Learn?
Oh, for the Lunch and Learn, no. We don't
Okay.
provide them for Lunch and Learns because it's free and short. But yeah, but if you need something, like, you can hopefully use the emails we've sent for like to show that you've signed up, if that works.
Yeah, absolutely. I just like to keep a file going of all the
Yes.
stuff I
Absolutely.
amazing.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sarah.
Sorry, it was just
You're okay.
messing with my phone.
Oh, you're okay.
Oh,
All good. All good. Any other questions? We're here for a couple minutes. Actually, I'll stop the recording. Thank you all so much for attending. This will be up. It'll be up on the website and our YouTube channel, usually within a couple of hours, but you'll get an email as well after the lunch and learn, just with, links in there and stuff. But of course, any questions that pop up later and you're like, oh, I forgot to ask this, or I just thought of this now, please send us an email. We're here. And thank you all so much for attending.